Good morning. It's 9 a.m. Monday, May 1st, 2023. This is the Muscatine County Board of Supervisors. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First is to review the agenda.
Do we need to add a?
Yeah.
I would like to make a motion to add item 3A to approve stamped warrants in the amount of $2,613.38.
I'll second.
I got a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next is discussion and possible action to approve claims dated May 1, 2023 in the amount of $587,928.71.
I'll move the approval.
Second.
Motion by Jeff, second by Kurt. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. 3A is stamped warrants in the amount of, what was that amount, Jeff?
$2,613.38.
So moved.
I got a motion by Nathan,
Second.
second by Jeff. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Next is discussion and possible action to approve a contract between Spark Consulting and the Muscatine County Historical Preservation Commission in an amount not to exceed $24,650 for consulting services for a survey of transportation development in Muscatine County, Iowa, with Historic Preservation Commissioner Lynn Pruitt. Lynn?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Lynn.
Hey, Lynn. Fun.
Yeah, this is a contract with Spark Consulting, Rebecca McCarley, who's a historic preservation consultant. It is to do this transportation survey, looking at how the county got started, what was some of the original riverboat traffic, river crossings with ferries and so on, when the railroads came in, the highways, and stagecoach routes, those kind of things. We're going to be documenting that, researching and documenting. We submitted for a grant from the state, CLG grant, in the amount of $21,000. We received that, so that will be used to pay the bulk of this contract. We're ready to get started on it. We just need this approval, and away we go.
Are you gonna raise the funding then for the other, what is it, 3,650 on your own?
It's coming through the fund that we have with the county, our annual
Okay.
fund.
Our annual allocation.
Good deal.
Monitors.
I'll move the approval.
Second.
I got a motion by Jeff, second by Nathan. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
How long does that, I didn't read completely in the contract, how long do you anticipate that?
It's a year-long contract,
Okay.
maybe a little longer, but that's what the target is. Well, I'm up here, if you don't mind, wanted to bring you up to date on, gave you each a page that talks about a public hearing on the 16th of May for the nomination of the Fairport Fish Hatchery as a historic district. And that all has made its way through the state. And now one of the requirements is to have a public meeting. So we'll be holding that in conjunction with our monthly Historic Preservation Commission meeting on the 16th at noon. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. The other thing that I handed out was this notice of the Historic Preservation Month conference that we are hosting in conjunction with the City Historic Preservation Commission at the National Pearl Button Museum on Saturday the 20th. You're all invited to come to that, and we think it's a good way to promote the work we're doing here in the city and county. So, any questions about that? Had a great opening of the Fairport Fish Hatchery trails last Saturday, I believe it was, in the snow and the sleet and the wind, and a little bit chilly, but we got it done. So, thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you,
Thanks,
Lynn.
Thank you.
Next is items with County Engineer Brian Horowski. Morning, Brian. First is discussion and possible action to approve various utility permits.
Good morning. We have one utility permit today. It is from Liberty Communications of West Liberty, Iowa. Liberty request to repair their fiber optic line near House 1427. They had a handhold that got caught on fire. So they'll have to, it's going to be a pretty significant repair, more than typical, so we required a permit for this one. They'll have to expose a lot of fiber and then rebore some sections of interduct and set some new handholds. So as far as repairs, it's pretty extensive.
I'll move the approval.
I got a motion by Jeff,
Second.
second by Kurt. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next is discussion on uncontrolled intersections throughout the county.
Yes. Get my things here in line. Some of this has maybe already been distributed.
Oh, do I get one of those?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I stole yours, but don't let that bother you.
I figure I was just second class here. It's cool. I'm used to it. What's this from?
I'll touch on these here as we go. But what I just handed out was a write-up that the DOT did, probably about back in 2015, about uncontrolled intersections, somewhat of a brief overview on it. And then this right here was a flyer that they handed out with conjunction with it, as far as just some driving prescriptions. So a few months back, and over the last few months, we've had some concerns about our uncontrolled intersections. So I was tasked with looking into them. We started with trying to figure out how many we had. There was some varying data out there. We came up with that we have 123 total uncontrolled intersections on our secondary road system in the county. And we used the definition that we found to be the most prevalent, talking with the DOT and other county engineers, that an uncontrolled intersection is an intersection with no stop signs in any direction or yield signs. So it's a 123 intersections with nothing at all.
Are you aware of how many are those are three-way and how many are four?
Yes. So there's 109 three-way intersections, and there's 14 four-way intersections.
When you do that count, Brian, I know in some of the numbers we'd seen where, an intersection could be counted multiple times. Is that actual places, or is that, it could be multiple?
It is not multiple. It is
That's
actual intersections.
Actual intersections, okay.
Yes. We have a few locations in the county that someone could dispute. I don't know how familiar everyone is, but like on Holly and 160th, I believe it is. Some people might call it a four-way. Some people might call it two T's. We call it two T's. But every now and then you come up to a section where it kind of offsets a little bit.
Jog.
It's got a jog in it.
And you count that as two or one?
Two.
Two T's, got it.
So like I said, that seemed to be the most prevalent definition of one that's used. I wanted to briefly speak to the laws. Jim spoke to it here a couple weeks back. So at an uncontrolled intersection, the law that states the right-of-way rule governs who is to yield to who at an uncontrolled intersection. A vehicle approaching an intersection must yield to any vehicle that's already in the intersection. If two vehicles are approaching an intersection at the same time, the the driver on the left must yield to the driver on the right. That's the standard law that dictates that.
Brian,
Another,
this is probably a dumb question. I'm sorry. Like in a subdivision where there's that doesn't control that. These aren't counted. Excuse me. Subdivisions with uncontrolled intersections are not counted in these totals. I would assume,
no,
right? 'Cause
that's just
private.
it's just what is on our road system.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thank you.
So our current procedure for evaluating intersections, we do not have a formal written policy. What we have is a standard procedure. We reference the guidelines suggested by the Iowa DOT. Those guidelines reference the use of the manual of uniform traffic control devices, or we call it the MUTCD. It is kind of the holy Bible for anything and everything traffic control related. So we use the MUTCD for evaluation of our intersections. This, when evaluating, that procedure includes performing an engineering study to the intersection in question, which involves quite a few line items, but some of the big ones are looking at traffic counts, the intersection or layout of the intersection, and the accident history of that intersection, and that's intersection specific. I reached out to the other 99 counties in the state requesting if any of them had a formal stop sign policy. Somewhat my surprise, no counties responded with a policy. All responding counties outline their procedure for evaluating their stop signs at intersections as the same as ours, which is referencing that MUTCD handbook. So that's kind of our procedure, how we've handled it in prior years. That was kind of before me. I know that we've had some instances where stop signs did get installed. I believe that was related to either the geometry of the intersection was changed. It was maybe taken out of a Y and turned into a T. Or there was a building or permanent vegetation that got built or installed. So there was a sight distance issue. In the early 2000s, there was a push to better understand intersections, and that's where the two handouts I gave, that's where the push for them came from. So in 2005, the Iowa State University did a study to evaluate uncontrolled intersections throughout the state. The study mostly specifically looking at crash data at controlled and uncontrolled intersections. The summarized findings of it was that there is no statistical difference in the safety performance of ultra-low volume stop controlled and uncontrolled intersections. So that's kind of a word salad there, but in simpler terms, installing stop signs on lesser travel roads didn't improve the safety of the roads. There's been some other studies, but for the most part, all of them reference that 2005 ISU study. So after reviewing the laws that are in place and looking at those studies, guidelines set by the MUTCD, and also comparing to the standard procedures of the other counties throughout the state, I recommend that we continue to evaluate intersections as the same as we have in the past. Following the procedure will most likely mean that uncontrolled intersections will continue to be used throughout the county. As that one red flyer that I handed out showed, I suggest to all drivers at controlled and uncontrolled intersections to use caution and drive defensively.
Who does driver's ed these days? Is it the AEA? Is it individual school systems? Does anybody know?
Anyone got kids going through it?
Mine are a couple years shy, so.
I believe it's AEA.
I wonder if we could work with them to put a greater component of understanding, because in my experience, more education beats more regulation all the time in terms of effectiveness. I wonder if there's something we could do to say, hey, you live in a rural area, know these important things I remember there's a million rules we're all taught in driver's ed, and probably 80% of them fly right out of our head, and we all just drive according to what we're used to. So I would love to see if there's something we can do to improve education, regardless of what we do with regard to the uncontrolled intersections.
Definitely.
For me on it, I mean, with 14 four-way intersections, and if we controlled one direction of those at $800, they cost about $800, right? To put 2 stop ahead and 2 stop signs and leave the other direction flow free. You know, we're looking at about $11,000. It may never impact somebody getting in an accident again. We don't have a crystal ball to know if that's possible, but to me, for $11,000 to control those 14 and maybe continue to evaluate all the 3-ways, and is it possible on a 3-way that on the single direction, that one yield sign, I mean, if we ever decided to control some of those 3-ways, is it possible that one yield sign on the single direction would be sufficient? And that'd only be one sign for 200 instead of maybe 2, like the stop ahead and the stop sign?
It is a possibility. We don't, as far as I know, we do not currently use any yield signs. So it's a little challenging then putting up somewhat conflicting signs, even though they wouldn't be at the same intersection. It'd be, one intersection has yield, the next one has stop signs, the next one's uncontrolled. It'd just be having conflicting patterns.
Was it 200 a sign or 400 a sign?
So it's roughly 200 a sign, but to install a stop sign, it takes a stop ahead and a stop sign. So it comes out to about 400. Obviously, that's an estimate. It does include the labor. One thing that does not include, because it's fairly difficult to estimate, but these take an engineering study. So someone, which would most likely be me, or would have to evaluate. You'd have to go visit the intersection. So that would certainly rack up the cost as well. And it would pull me or my staff away from their other duties.
What does that entail exactly? Is that, like, how many hours on average would you say that takes to complete?
I'm guessing it probably would take about 2 hours. I mean, a lot of that being drive time.
Yeah.
And of course, if we did decide to put them stop signs up at the 14 at least, I suppose we'd want some kind of evaluation to see, maybe one direction has significantly more traffic than the other, so we'd want to put it at the least amount of traffic, flow on the one way.
Right, correct.
And it wouldn't generally be like it had to be done overnight if we decided to do that. I mean, you could kind of work on that when maybe you got a little extra time, and it doesn't have to be a complete a deadline to complete it by if we went that direction.
Unfortunately, I think that if we were talking about a blanket, like looking at the 123 and saying, we are going to evaluate these and we are going to scratch them off the books, per se, I don't think we can stop and go. If we're going to do it, we evaluate all.
That's fine also.
Because unfortunately, there really isn't a very great starting point for. Dennis actually pulled it for me. The crash data in the last 10 years on our secondary road system, there's been 8 accidents that were caused by failure to yield the right of way at an uncontrolled intersection. None of those happened at the same intersection. And to warrant signs. Unfortunately, I didn't bring the MUTCD with me. I have a printout of a portion of it. We try not to let it leave our office, but to warrant it, you're looking at five or more crashes in a 3-year period.
That's the manual specification.
Yes, that's their guidance, and 3 or more crashes have been reported within a 2-year period, which is that's quite a few. Like I said, we've had 8 in 10 years.
I mean,
one of the questions I have is, what's your trigger point on any intersection? So what causes the engineer's office whether it's controlled or not, to look at an intersection?
It's a great
Is there-
question.
You know, is there a trigger?
It'd be a request by the public or by the board to look at a specific intersection. Also, just in our travels, our maintenance guys noticing any type of building or change in the use of a property that might change our sight distance at an intersection, a permanent change.
Yeah, cause I just think through, as you see, as activities throughout the county and locations of various things change, you could have intersections that become more or less dangerous over time, and I don't know how we're alerted to that and what our process is to look at that when it comes, you know, if we're, I don't know if zoning, if that's something, Eric, when we have a new application for some, you know, maybe it's a confinement, maybe it's whatever, a field entrance, I don't know, if there's a process that we go through at that point to look at the intersections in the area, the traffic patterns or anything to see the impact on the traveling public. Okay.
But that is a great point. I mean, you know, if a subdivision goes in or traffic patterns, anything that could change, it would significantly affect an intersection.
So, on some of this data, I mean, this is sticking out to me. I mean, in 2015, 52 of the 88 people killed at intersections in Iowa were killed at rural intersections. I mean, that's close to 2/3 at the bottom there.
It doesn't specify which kind
I
of,
mean,
but that doesn't say uncontrolled, does it?
no,
No.
So that's
just
not
rural intersections.
terribly
They could have been
helpful.
controlled.
helpful PSA, at least for us.
From a legal standpoint, I'd say a couple of things. One, most of the prosecutions that my office does for uncontrolled intersections, which actually does happen, are in the city. So, I mean, you have to realize that there's not only uncontrolled intersections in the county, but there's also uncontrolled intersections within the city of Muscatine, or any city for that matter. So I think that's important because accidents occur in both, you know, rural and city locations. Secondly, whatever we do, we need to be using a system or a process by which we can evaluate and make sure that we've made an appropriate decision so we avoid potential liability for somebody saying, we haven't done our job. And so, when you hang your hat on the process, you can be confident that you've used a process and you've consistently applied those things across the board. If you decide to carve out folks that are intersections and not use that process and take another, then you always run the risk of creating that environment where you've taken exception to do these things that you wouldn't necessarily have done. And we just always need to be mindful of that, in my mind, and careful of that, so we don't set a precedent or recognize some intersections to the exclusions of others that are very much the same. And so, you know, it's I don't wanna say it's an all or nothing thing, but from a legal perspective, the process, I think, is important to have defined, and it's important to follow and make sure the engineer's office does that, whether that's board-driven or, you know, driver-driven, or it's just driven by the number of accidents, as the case may be. So that would be my only comment. It's not a direction about what the board should do, it's about what to be mindful of in regards to that situation.
Well, the fact of the matter is, several weeks ago, you addressed the board in stating that the law is on the books of the yield to the right law. So there's already a law of what the drivers need to be conscious of. Would that be correct?
And it is prosecuted. I'm not gonna tell you it's super frequently. I've done several in the last year that I've been handling them, but my recollection is that those were in the city. And, you know, there are accidents in the county that have occurred or at an uncontrolled intersection that are still under investigation. And, you know, and realize that involves a technical investigation and a lot of time and effort to get to the point where a decision has been made relative to what charge or charges, if any, are gonna be filed. complaints are generated, nothing's happened, well, that doesn't mean nothing's happened. It just means the public's not in the loop of what's going on relative to that particular. We've had a couple of pretty serious ones, not at uncontrolled and controlled. I mean,
Yeah.
that are under investigation, and so it takes time. So when you hear that nobody's doing anything, that doesn't mean nobody's doing anything. That may mean it is actually being investigated, which involves way more today than maybe it used to, with phones and social media and getting information and figuring out what people are doing and not doing and all of that sort of thing. So it's just important to know that. Remember that.
When you made the comment, all or nothing, was you referencing the three-way and four-way, or if we controlled all the four-way, would that be your
Well,
all
I'm
or
not-
all?
what I'm saying is, if you decided to pursue the four-way and not the three-way, there are probably a good number of those that are consistent with one another. So now you treated some differently than others that are very much the same. And so to me, if you decide to proceed not using the process that's historically been used in Muscatine County and the state, and you decide to do something different, I would just urge you to think about across the board, not just a piece of the pie. I think that has a greater risk for the county than all approach, if that's what you decide you want to do and direct the engineer to do. So,
Brian, there's probably some three-ways that would garner signage before some of the four-ways, probably, on some of the roads in the county. I'm just thinking of a couple on Davis Avenue that are three-ways and don't get, that road gets a lot of traffic from West Liberty to Nichols. It's, I think the Google cutoff road now for Iowa City, but it gets a lot of traffic. And there's a couple on there that are three-ways that probably have more traffic than the four-ways that on some of these other 14.
And that's one of those where, evaluating the geometry can really change how you look at an intersection. If it's your standard T, it's very obvious who has the right of way. If it's a Y, it can be a little more complicated. And then you start.
You're taking most of the Ys out in the county though, aren't you?
Or trying to.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Trying to get there.
Well, I struggle with this one. I know that if we put them in, it doesn't guarantee that we're not going to have an accident or somebody's gonna get hurt or killed. To me, it feels like the right thing to do. My concern is, I think I brought it up before, is you get, whether it's young drivers or even any driver for that matter, if I'm going down a gravel road and there's no stop sign at that four-way intersection, I think a lot of people, even though the law says yield to the one on the right, assume that if there's no stop sign for me, that the other direction has one. I think that's just the natural thought process that most drivers make, and maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I would think. So,
I know, I think most drivers, just for instance, don't seem to know that when you have two left turn lanes, you turn into the lane that corresponds to your own. I don't know if we need a sign for that too. I imagine that creates a lot of accidents, and I'm not saying that to be flip, but there's only so many signs you can put up before you got to just start educating people.
And one thing to remember too is that these are, for the most part, they're what they consider ultra low volume roads, or excuse me, ultra low volume intersections.
What's the count to make an ultra
It's somewhere around 150
per day?
Yes, vehicles entering an intersection. And one thing to remember too is if you look at the location of these, if you think about where they're at, the majority, if not all, of the traffic is local. So they're familiar with the roads for the moment, or at least they should be.
Yeah.
So, I know I learned a lot going through this process. It was definitely eye opening to some of the data.
Brian, I know you said you kind of hail from Washington County, have familiarity there. Not a lot of uncontrolled intersections that you're familiar with there.
No.
So, That would suggest to me that whatever they were doing in Washington County, whenever, did not jive totally with that IDOT manual. Do we have any idea, or are you able to find out? I know
So
a lot of folks didn't respond, but can we
Yes,
find out what their rationale was?
So I've spoke to folks over there. It's been that way for a very long time, and they're not really sure why.
Okay.
Their system was set up that way.
Yeah. I mean, from a
But it's been
systems,
established for a very long time.
from a systems point of view, I have concerns, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're disqualifying concerns, but concerns about adopting an entirely new policy when we've got one that is kind of accepted the state over, and anyone who deviates it either hasn't responded to us or doesn't have a good reason for their deviation. That's just, and then that kind of echoes the lawyer in me. What Jim was saying is, if you start a new policy, you better make sure the policy makes sense.
If the policy was as simple as we control all intersections and they're all controlled, it's pretty much,
Oh yeah, that
Done
would,
though,
that
right?
would be a policy.
I mean, that, if we did that, we're looking, not counting the labor part, the sign part, you're looking at about $55,000 if you implement that over the next few years. I don't know if that's really unreasonable.
No, I'm not saying it's not, I'm just trying to see, it's hundreds and.
Yeah, I think that's, in my mind, it sounds like we have a process, so you can argue or not whether we like the process, that's a whole nother issue, but I think Jim's advice would be, when you have a process, stick to your process and utilize that. I'm a little bit concerned that in the process, there's no triggers. We just had a pretty bad accident at a controlled intersection in the county. And I would think that would warrant some real serious looks, I'm sure they are, looking at that. What happened? Why did it happen? Was there anything we could do to improve the safety at that intersection? And money, I mean, if you have data and stuff, there's highway safety dollars available that you can get, but again, they're sought after and hard to get. You have to have pretty good, information to track those, but. So that's kind of the way I think, it's like, what's the process? Are we comfortable with the process? And then make sure we do it, move it forward. I don't know.
I mean, I think I'd like to make a motion to control all the intersections over the next 2 or 3 years, and I'm making a motion.
Is that specific enough? And I don't think we have it on for an action item.
It's not on for action.
We could put it, yeah.
We can certainly put that on for next week.
Okay.
I think that, if you've driven out in a county a lot like I have in my life, because that's where I born and raised at and grew up at, and you look at even, I'll call them major county roads, farm to markets, paved both ways. I've really paid a lot of attention on purpose to these intersections that have substantial, I don't know what the traffic count is on it, but it's substantial. And matter of fact, I have to go through one or two of these that have paved intersections going over to some of my farms. And some of these intersections, it's not uncommon to have two cars at the same time, get there at the same time. It's not out of the question to have three, for sure. It happens with some regularity. But I've really paid attention to this. And the amount of people, you're in the distance, there's several directions that you can come to these, and you can see a long ways. My guess is that at least a third of the vehicles that come to those two intersections I'm speaking about do not stop. They do not come to a stop. If they're making a corner, it's a slow roll, or it's a roll through. And that's in what I would consider major rural intersections. And so what that tells me is the comfort of the people that utilize them all the time and that's how they address it. That's just my 2 cents worth for what I see and from what I've done and what I've seen for 60 years. So, for what that's worth, that's what I've seen.
Yeah, well, I think distracted driving, I think I saw somebody run you into the median last week. On a 4-lane highway, and it's distracted driving is a huge problem.
Did you happen to see that
I
incident?
happened to see that incident.
I saw it pretty closely.
Yeah, I know you did. Good thing you were watching because she wasn't.
Right. Run me up on the medium. They're right there by Culver's.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
But-
and she
but-
wasn't paying a lick of attention.
But that, I think that's, every day I drive, I see people with cell phones in their hands.
Yeah, if I wouldn't been paying
I
attention,
think we have a hands-free law, don't we?
we'd been swapping paint.
So I think we,
I thank Brian for the information. I'd like to make it an action item next week, and then we'll see if we have the support to move on, or we stay the way we are.
sounds good to me.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
One more thing, Brian, on, you're not done with, construction project update. You got a minute for that?
I sure do. If I can
Okay.
find my,
Get the next packet, you'll be fine.
brought my whole desk with me. I wanted to give an update on our construction projects. Things are moving along quick, and other projects are starting to move along quick. So our box culverts, the one that's on 150th Street, the box is actually complete, and it's a large triple cast-in-place box culvert. I don't think I've ever seen one get built that fast. Took them about 2 weeks. They'll start on the dirt work here, probably hopefully late this week. They'll start backfilling and shaping the road. The one on Holly Ave, they started last week, and they hope to start doing some concrete work middle of this week. So I know that they ran into some issues there with water, lots and lots of water working in that sand. Our HMA resurfacing maintenance project, which is with Manats. We started that last year. They did Bayfield Road. They got it completed last year, and then they kind of had to button up due to the weather. They plan to come back this week. They'll be here starting Tuesday, prepping, and then on Thursday they'll start paving. And those roads are the seal coat portions of North Isaac and 180th Street, and then what we call Steel Mill Road, so 102nd, North Isaac, and 112th up there from Moscow to Wilton. So it'll be good to get them in, get rocking and rolling on it. So that's what I got for a project update.
All right. Anything else?
No, not today.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Brian.
Appreciate it. Next is discussion and possible action to approve the minutes of the April 24, 2023 regular meeting.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Jeff, second by Danny. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Correspondence. Jeff, you have anything?
Well, Kurt forwarded us a note from a resident on wind turbines, the meeting that was held in West Liberty. On the 27th, I attended the groundbreaking for the Kent cat litter plant, world's best cat litter. It was a great event, a lot of people there, good thing. On the 27th, we had the joint meeting with the Muscatine School Board in the city of Muscatine. I also got I've got a number of emails, and I'm not sure if I forwarded them all or not. Mid-American, I think Scott made me aware that Mid-American has adopted a policy now that if the water comes up to your gas meter or gets to it, they're shutting gas off. So I think there's currently about 145 customers between Scott and Muscatine counties that have had their gas shut off. I think we're about 17 in Montpelier is the number now that have no gas service to their home.
That's something new, Jeff?
It's a
It's
new
been a
policy that they've implemented in the last year, yeah, and we were kind of caught off guard. I think we had a resident call Scott about it,
Right.
and then we happened to meet with Ken Beck, he was a Scott County Chair, and so he's been forwarding us a leader. Now finally, we're on and we've gotten Eric and Chris Jasper on the Mid-Americans email list, so as they do these things, we know who's affected and how. Chris Jasper, our EMA and I think I forwarded that out to you also. He's alerted the Red Cross, so we've tried to make people aware if there are situations that come up, they need assistance, the Red Cross is on board to help people, that anybody's displaced or has any needs, they should reach out to them, or there's resources. Obviously, always our EMA or our county zoning's aware of what's going on generally and can help. So we had that, and then, I got an email, and I think we talked about it once before, and then she's followed up from a Vicky Bishop about Pettibone. You know, she has a number of concerns down there, but the concerns about the safety of Pettibone with all the industrial traffic and also traffic, sounds like it's being used more and more as a cutoff from Stewart, keep off the traffic on Stewart or something, or with whatever. Some of the issues are rail crossings, and again, we have very little control over rail crossings. We have no control, I believe, would be the answer, right, Brian? The other issue was that she has wondered about putting guardrails around the pits, some of the pits. And I think in conversations with Brian, they meet road standards, and we really don't have accident data to support anything else. So we would have to defer road maintenance dollars from other activities to do anything further there. So I think that's kind of where that is. So I'll probably get back with her.
I
and
wonder
talk
if
to her.
lighting's an issue on that road.
I don't know, I know we don't have any lighting.
I know I've heard some other complaints from down there, I just wondering, I know there's a lot of equipment getting on there, and a lot of guys drive back and forth to work at Monsanto's. I don't know what the heck we could do to make it safer.
Yeah,
I know that equipment being on the road was also another concern, so
Yeah.
I think that'd be more of an enforcement
Yeah,
situation.
I know a couple times I've heard that fork trucks, like early before daylight, will be driving on the road, no lights, cars come up on them, and I know there's end loaders and other pieces of equipment, but I don't know if there's something that we can contact those companies down there to be more aware of, maybe being safe when they're out there. I know they probably gotta be out there, but
what's that?
We've tried, I mean, that's gone on for a couple of years, and you're right, I mean, the forklifts early morning may or may not have a beacon going. I think it is truly an enforcement issue, if there's a.
I believe that Bayer has reached out to all their employees and suggested to them to take Stewart Road,
They
which,
did.
which I think would certainly solve a lot of that issue. You know, you're going down through that industrial area and so on. Maybe it's a little shorter for you, maybe it isn't, I don't know. But it would certainly be much safer to just take Stewart Road, and that problem would be solved, and go with that, stay out of that industrial area.
Okay, well,
That's it?
That's
All
it
right.
for me.
Nathan?
So correspondence, we got a lot of stuff from Chris Jasper, keeping us up to date on the flood, and have heard very good things about him from when we were at that meeting with the school system in the city on, what was that, Thursday? Very, very high praise for Chris. So I wanted to pass that on. Also had a very nice phone conversation with a gentleman by the name of Doug Norman, who called in, just had wonderful things to say about Eric Sanders, how he's helped out tons of veterans, and it's just been incredible. Could not praise the man enough, so I just wanted to pass that on, say attaboy to Eric, and share the good news. Got the information that I think Jeff provided from that wind turbine information here. This
Kurt?
Yeah, and Kurt, I'm sorry, Kurt, and the folks who contacted Kurt, that was forwarded to us. A lot of food for thought there. That's, I think, all I have for correspondence.
Okay. I had the emails and the flood correspondence with Chris Jasper, the windmill information that was very, very good. Email from Vicky Bishop as well in regard to Pettibone. Attended the joint meeting on the 27th, and I had the correspondence with the resident on the Mid-America gas shut-off, that I'd like to touch on that just a bit. I asked this gentleman, you know, Mid-America's position, according to Ken, was they need to be able to get to the shut-off, before the shut-off is submerged in case there is damage and be a gas leak apparently in that dwelling or structure or whatever the case may be. And so I asked this resident, I said, what would it take to raise the gas shut-off in your situation? He said, just gotta raise it up about 6 feet. And he said the water, he's lived there 22 years, and he said the water has never ever been higher than that in the record flooding. And my question to Mid-America is, why can't the shutoffs in some or most or all or a few of these cases be such that these people don't have to be displaced out of their homes? You know, it seems like a relatively simple fix to me. Even if they can say they don't have the dollars to do it, give the homeowner the opportunity to raise their shutoff if that would keep them in their homes, because that's an awful small problem to be displaced out of your home and put wherever you might end up at. I don't know where that is, but I think that's something that really needs to be looked at and really needs to be addressed by next spring for these people, because simple fix for this individual anyway.
Well, it's 150 families in the Scott and Muscatine County area.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, he said it'd be very simple, and I'm thinking that the company position on this is going to be, well, you know, we won't have access. We'd have to have a boat. We'd have to have this. We'd have to have that in case there was a situation where it had to be shut off. But that seems to me to be a relatively small problem to drop a boat in the water and slide over there and shut that valve off. But that's my 2 cents worth, and that's all I had for correspondence. Ben?
I had those same emails from Chris and the email that Kurt forwarded on the windmills. I did attend that Camp Feed groundbreaking event with Jeff, and then that city, school board, city council meeting. I did get one call again this week in regard to the side-by-sides and the regulations on the roads, and I told him at that time it was gonna be on the agenda. That's why I reached out to you, Scott. Sounds like maybe the reason it's not on the agenda is that we're waiting for Jim to look into it a little bit more.
Right, I'm hoping that that'll be on next week's agenda. I hope if he has enough time to get that.
This is the confusion on whether the enacted state legislation
Before we make a
overruled
decision,
or impacted
or don't make
what
a
our
decision,
current ordinance was,
what
yeah.
the state,
Yep, yep.
and that's all I had.
Okay. Kurt?
Okay, attended the Liberty Energy, the wind farm, on the Thursday the 27th, just to gather some information. The joint city school board meeting. Also had the email from Rhonda Staley that I forwarded to you guys. I also received yesterday an email from a Dwayne Reese, who lives in Nebraska. He's asking who maintained the Brockway Cemetery in Orono Township, and Tybee had given me the answer to that, so I can forward that information to him or find out. He said he has relatives there, and in removing trees down there, some of the gravestones had been disrupted. And was wondering about if we could, make somebody aware of that, so didn't happen again. And then I had another call during the week from a West Liberty resident about rural cemetery cleanups, and I returned a call to him, and he hasn't responded to me on which one. But I have a list now that Tybee gave me, so I can pass that information on to him if it's one that is taking care of the trustees, so.
That it?
Yeah, and then Chris's
Okay.
emails also.
All right. Very good. Committee reports. Jeff, you have anything?
On the 26th, I attended the Bi-State Commission.
Okay. Nathan?
Other than the joint meeting, no.
Okay. I attended the bi-state meeting as well. That's all I had. Danny?
I didn't have any.
Kurt?
The 27th, Thursday, I had We Lead board meeting.
Okay.
Wait a second, I'm sorry. I may have missed one. Let me-
You looking up one more?
Yeah, I can't remember which, I think. Nope, we got the wrong week. I did
We're
not.
good?
Yeah,
All
we're
right.
good.
All right. Next is items with the administration office. First is discussion and possible action to approve resolution 0501-2301, approval of second replat of original lots 20-22 in Wildlife Estates subdivision.
And this was.
And that's,
This
go
was
ahead.
Actually, something that we did, because it was just a replat, the resolution and certificate of plat acceptance wasn't in your packet like it would normally be on a whole subdivision. The attorney questioned that, we looked back how we handled some replats in the past, and there was resolutions and a certificate. It just gives the attorneys the ability to do what they need to do recording it. We'd approved you had already approved
Yeah.
the replat, we just didn't have the resolution. It's a little unclear whether it's really required, but we've always handled it that way in the past. It just didn't get in your packet, so we're happy to
Okay.
approve the resolution and certificate for what you already approved as far as the replat of those lots.
Just remind me physically where this is.
Wildlife Estates, that is, up where the old Hawkeye Raceway was, on 61, that was turned into a subdivision in originally like 2008, I believe. when it was replatted.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
I'll move the approval.
I'll second.
I got a motion by Jeff, second by Nathan. This is a roll call vote. Jeff?
Aye.
Nathan?
Aye.
I vote aye. Danny?
Aye.
And Kurt?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next is action to approve a Muscatine County disaster declaration. I know that,
Yeah, and you probably saw, it. Chris put
Chris.
this together. This is so we have access to resources through the state and homeland. I think it may be somewhat of a moot point as the governor has added Muscatine County as a disaster declaration, but this doesn't hurt. It gives us access and people that need help, access to other resources that might become available if they're affected by floodwater. So I would make a motion to approve.
Second.
motion by Jeff, second by Nathan. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Next is action to set a public hearing for Monday, June 5th, 2023 at 9 a.m. on proposed amendments to the FY 22-23 Muscatine County budget.
I'll move the approval.
Second.
Motion by Jeff, second by Kurt. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Let's see here. Discussion and possible action authorizing the execution of the Wellmark third-party administration documents for FY 22-23.
I'll move the approval.
Second.
I got a motion by Jeff, second by Danny. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Action to set the FY 23-24 health and dental premiums.
That information was in your packet. I will remind you that one of our unions, the deputies union, we are still required to negotiate health insurance. That's one of the items we're required to negotiate with them. So these rates, the employee share of these rates reflect what was negotiated in that 3-year contract, and this is the 3rd year of it. So, at least for our deputies, these are the rates we have to use, and the county has always been pretty adamant about, we're gonna treat all of our employees the same.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we had those extra claims last year, but that we have to raise them, but hopefully they'll come back down in years to come, but I don't think it's unreasonable amounts that are proposed at all.
This is about, what would you say, 3/4 of a point?
Yeah.
Well, and I
So-
look,
And our costs are up
I
significantly.
look
more.
closely and evaluate, once I do have well-marked numbers, and these rates, put us at 92% of what they project the cost to be. So we're certainly not over-raising our rates.
That's what I thought.
Hopefully we'll have a little better year this next year, and, that 92% will come out to be 100% of our actual cost, but.
One thing I was wondering is, since we are self-insured, how often do we check with others to get?
We haven't for a long time. We did it probably 10, 12 years ago. We looked at other third-party options, and you just can't beat the negotiated cost savings that we get with Wellmark and the contracts that they have with providers. I mean, nobody else could touch that,
Okay.
so.
So I'll move to approve the recommended rates.
I'll second.
Motion by Jeff, second by Danny. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Next is action to set the health insurance annual enrollment and dental insurance open enrollment periods for FY 23-24 for May 15 through June 2nd, 2023.
So each year, what we do, once you guys have set the rates, we send out information to all of our eligible employees, showing them what the costs are for the 3 plans. They have an opportunity to switch between plans if they want to at that time, and add or remove people from their health insurance.
I'll move the approval.
Motion by Jeff, second by Nathan. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Anything other, Nancy?
I don't believe I have anything else.
No, we're good? All right. Thank you. Next is receive information from county employees. Do I have any county employees that wish to address the board at this time on an issue? Eric, how are you this morning?
Good. Just a couple things real quick. First, I want to give you a real quick update. The contractor installing the new furniture for the county attorney's office was here last week and has that about 99.9% completed. There was a couple parts. It seems like every time we get a package, there's a piece that's bent or a piece that's 2 left-hand returns or something. The electrician was here and got the power connected too. We had some challenges trying to get where our electricity runs through this building without drilling more holes, getting it to fit, but I specifically wanted to give a shout out to HNI, being here in town with them. There was a couple of pieces that we need to make it work seamlessly, and I made one phone call to somebody I knew, and a person was over here from customer service and worked with the installers and really just took care of some things. There was some bent pieces that came, the installer had already submitted warranty. The guys from HNI came back, had parts in hand already. It was really nice. I want to give a shout out to them to go the extra mile to get that all put together. So that's pretty much done. The networking people were supposed to be here this morning, and those should be up and running by the end of today. So as far as the flood, I did want to make a public announcement that there is funding available through our Grants to Counties program. I've printed off documents that have a summary of for wells that get flooded. We can use some of that Grants to County flooding. So if you hear from some of these people as they get back in some of their homes or their properties, if the well's been flooded, the Grants to County grant will cover an assessment, the cost of an assessment by a certified well contractor and shot chlorination of it. So we're trying to get that information. I sent that to Chris this morning as well. So we just want to get that word out that if there's any concerns about the water quality, we've got the established procedures for assessing and shot chlorination. We have funding available to assist with that. Just in that same vein, there was some communication breakdown. I kind of feel like I reached out to Chris. I was getting some information a little bit late or not getting it, so I had reached out to him. I'd heard about the utility shutoffs and looked into that. He was having trouble getting a hold of a person from the utility, and I said, we have contacts with those people all the time, so I was able to make one email. So I'm gonna be talking with him about making sure my office is getting the situation reports when it comes to a flood, because we have the environmental with wells and we have the displaced potential damage issues in the housing. So I'm gonna follow up with him to make sure that our ESF and our EOC functions are flowing the way they should. A couple comments were made about the gas meter or the gas shutoffs, just so people understand. The utility companies do have a lot of power and can establish procedures on where these disconnects and shutoffs can be located. In the flood prone areas, it's typical that we see the meters and disconnects for electrical have to be elevated by floodplain restrictions. If they're not on the side of a building or they're on a pole, the utility companies often have additional requirements for accessibility. They no longer want their people setting a ladder up to get up to these meters, and so it ends up being, if you have it on a pole, you have to literally construct, these are utility requirements, like a whole catwalk around it. It becomes a little more onerous, and so I suspect the same thing may happen with gas shutoffs, that it seems like it would be really simple to elevate it where the floodwaters can't get to it, but they want accessibility without requiring their employees to go up on ladders. And they really do, no pun intended, drive the boat on these types of things. We can require certain elevation requirements, then they can step in and say, well, if they're gonna be elevated, this is the type of access aperture that's gonna have to go with it, so our people aren't putting ladders up. Just so you're aware, I don't think it's an unreasonable question to ask about, could we move these things, but there may be additional.
Well, it makes a
requirements.
difference when they're not the one that's getting thrown out of their house, doesn't
No,
it?
I completely understand, I just don't want anybody to think that it's something that we're regulating, you know,
Yeah.
or mandating, but if they elevate these things, the utility companies can determine what kind of accessibility then to get up that high that the homeowner would have to install if that's where they want their shut off. So,
Yeah, I'm sure there's.
Have we had conversation with them, I know you mentioned it, and you're bringing it up, have we had conversation with them to consider raising these, and if they need a catwalk around them to?
I've not, I was able to make contact with the person from Mid-American who was putting out daily updates on customer, disconnections. So we're getting that information, so we know how many, you know, but that was the first I'd heard, you know, well, could we just raise it so, you know, we could find out, hey, if a homeowner wanted to pull a permit to do a modification to their gas line and put their shut off at this height, what would it be? But I suspect they will have rules on accessibility and requirements and.
Can't just make them keep a stick they can reach up and pull the friggin' switch with?
I mean, I've literally heard of people in the, you know, in the floodplain, they think it's just easy to put it up on a pole and they end up building a whole, like, pirate's nest, crow's nest around it in a enclosed ladder because utility companies don't.
Eric, that might be one, we should maybe even reach out a little bit with Scott County and their folks and see, because it's an issue up there too, and I know their board has talked about it, and maybe as a consolidated effort, we might have more impact on our requests with them, and just say, hey, let's do the right thing for the people here. Okay,
I think that's all I have.
Thank you.
yeah, ladders are expensive.
Do I have any other county employees that wish to address the board at this time on any issue? Seeing none? Received comments from the public. Does I have anyone from the public that would like to address the board on any issue at this time? Ma'am, step to the podium, state your name and address, please.
Good morning. My name is Rhonda Meredith, Rhonda Solmick Meredith. And I'm here because I'm concerned, my husband and I, Dane, live in Nichols.
Could I have you bring your microphone to you just a little bit?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We live outside of Nichols in Pike Township on Bay Circle. We moved there a year and a half ago when the Solmick Trust was changed and purchased a family farmhouse and my brother and sister's farm and nephew farm. We're here because of the wind turbine proposals that are going to come out soon to you. I believe maybe you've even received a letter from them. On April 12th, a company called Liberty Power, based in Canada, mailed letters to most residents and trusts in the Pike Township, Wapsie Township areas regarding a drop-in meeting on April 27th at the West Liberty School grounds for those who be interested in learning about leasing wind turbines on their properties. We attended that meeting and we have several concerns. I'm here today to ask some questions and share the concerns so it's on record. We're concerned that the attendees and the affected county landowners are given a sales pitch from Liberty Power, including the monetary reasons that they should put a wind turbine from Liberty Power on their property. We're concerned about the magnitude of the project. They're proposing 60 wind turbines in the Pike Township, Wapsie Township areas from St. Mary's Cemetery at Highway 22 going northeast towards West Liberty. We're concerned because talking about areas, the map that they used at the meeting and that they used to send letters to was over 3 years old. They, when I asked at the meeting, one of the representatives, why are you sending letters to landowners and looking at a 3-year-old map when directories and plats are out there just that are 6 months old, she shrugged and said, this is what Muscatine County gave us. And my sister, who was at the meeting also, talking to Joe Curry, who is a specialist trying to get people to sign up for their leases, said that they've been looking at this area and in Scott County and Lynn County for 2 years. So that's probably why the map is at that stage. We're concerned about their integrity and that they are dealing with real facts about our county. These are 600 feet high, the ones they're proposing. Now, to put that in perspective, and they are 6 megawatts. To put that into perspective, the average turbine, we've been doing research since then, we are finding in Iowa the average turbine is 275 to 300 feet high. These 60 turbines will be 600 feet high and 6 megawatts. Now, they talk about, and their fact sheet that they gave out at the meeting included their wind expertise. So we looked at the projects that they have finished or are on board. The one on board in Lee County, Illinois, which I believe at the meeting they had a poster of, is under construction, and it's Shady Oaks 2. Shady Oaks 1 were the average size turbines in Lee County. Shady Oaks 2 that they are building, they are the 600-foot structures. So to me, it's an experimental structure that they're planning to build 60 of. The 600 high turbines were developed for offshore areas on the ocean, and they're now starting to use them on land. So we will be one of the first. I asked a Liberty Power representative if they were familiar with the Muscatine County ordinances regarding commercial wind energy conversion system. And I had printed out the ordinance and brought with me. And she looked at me, I think her name was Olivia, and said, no. And I had with me the Board of Adjustment information, Title 3, Chapter 8, regarding the wind turbines and permits and processes and so on, and they have not looked at that either. So we are very concerned that this company is pushing quickly and trying to get as many signatures as possible. We were at the early part of the meeting. We spoke to Joe for over an hour. He's not with Liberty, he is with Evolve Surface Strategies, and his company gets leases for pipelines and all companies, and he's connected with Liberty on this project. And we were there an hour or so. My sister came in, Renetta Burlage, and her husband at 5, and I think they met you walking out. And they ended up staying 2.5 hours and talking to him. And his pitch was, don't you want this as a legacy for your children? You could get up to $18,000 annually per turbine if we put one on your property. And this went on, and it's the $18,000 comes from the percentage of wind that the turbine produces, and currently the 275 to 300 foot turbines might give a landowner $7,500 annually a year. These are going to increase with the size of the turbine. So he said to her that they're going to start calling on landowners. That was last Thursday, in the next 2 weeks, which would be this week and next. They had about 35 signatures on the attendance list at the meeting. Renetta happened to notice that, and he said that he felt maybe about 25 were positive and interested in signing leases. And he said 25 leases would be really good if they had 2 to 4 turbines per landowner. They would really be good to go. And so my feeling is they are coming through the back door to start getting people to sign up and then coming to you as the supervisors to backtrack and to start and say, well, we have all these residents who want to do this, and we need to tweak a few things and let us go forward. And our concern is, or our question is, please consider this for some time before it's allowed to go any further. One reason they are in a hurry is the Inflation Reduction Act is saying, it says to that they can get their tax credit on their turbines if the project is in the works before the end of 2024. Their first poster on their easels said that their first phase was land acquisitions in the years 2023 to 2024. That coincides with the National Inflation Reduction Act requirements. So we are also concerned, extremely concerned, that for these 600-foot high turbines, they are so tall that pilings must be driven under the massive concrete and steel foundations to support each tower. If the tower is abandoned, the foundation and the pilings will stay in the farm ground. Driving the pilings into the ground creates a lot of vibration. At what distance, I'm asking you? Can a pile driving operation cause structural cracks and plaster cracks in homes, farm buildings, and their foundations? We know firsthand about this. We lived in Coralville prior to moving out here in 2021. I would say as the crow flies from where we lived to the intersection going up at 218 and 180, Interstate 80 was 3 miles. They did the driving of the pilings at night, and they woke us up every night. Now, who's to say when these will be done, but they're going to hire, they said 300 people to work on these. If the pilings woke us up for a few concrete structures being installed at Interstate 80, imagine 60 being installed in the small areas of Pike Township and Wapsie. The other thing is, the blades are 254 feet long, and a football field is typically 300. So there are 3 blades. We pasted off on our property. We couldn't believe the length that they are. They will go at 200 miles an hour. And in Iowa, there's a $20,000 minimum fine for harassing, injuring, or killing a bald eagle by a private citizen. But in looking at some of the ordinances that have changed in different counties, that's all waived for turbine companies. So other questions I am asking of you. Does anyone really know the future or unintended consequences of building such a huge and newly developed structure at 6 megawatts when across Iowa we're used to 2.75 to 1.75 to 252 megawatts, and a 600 long high structure when it's twice as long as the ones that have been in Iowa for years? What about crop dusting? At 200 miles an hour, one turbine and a crop dusting situation nearby, it's spreading that chemical. How much further?
Excuse me.
Rainfall patterns, are they, could they be disrupted for 60 turbines, pardon me, that high? Water table disruption from the massive foundations. And really, as close as Williamsburg, what about hubs catching on fire? Firemen can only pull up and watch. In Williamsburg, 6 months ago, in October, a hub caught on fire. The blades and debris fell off, burning, and started the cornfield on fire. It's more often than you think. We've looked online and see different counties have had this happen. What is their rush? Again, I explained that already. They have a time limit in order for a huge tax break on each turbine. I'm all for good energy. I'm all for cleaning up the air. But I think what a lot of people don't understand, my husband is an engineer, explained it to me in detail that a 6 megawatt wind turbine contains as much as 2,500 pounds of rare earth elements, and now they're only sourced in China. There was a California company that was mining rare earth, and it is no longer. So China drills into the ground and uses water to pull out these rare earth chemicals, and they get about $100,000 per turbine for the rare earth elements. So in that process, they use tons of fossil fuel to handle the machinery to drill, and in fact are polluting the air there, which is negating what I was trying to do with clean air in general for the world. But for ourselves, of course, Mid-America Energy and others are saving taxpayers' money when these turbines are helping the electric grid, but at what cost, really? There's a lot of development from Quaise Energy and Ever Energy globally who are sourcing this kind of energy out of with geothermal energy, with one drill into the ground, and could, in effect, give the world energy for 200 million years. So at some point, and these turbines have a life of 20 years before they are obsolete or they are in need of repair at 600 feet high. There are stipulations in your ordinances that talk about an abandoned turbine, but again, how easy is it to fix? So the representative said that for about up to 4 acres of farmland will be lost per turbine. And that's a lot of land, even in our townships. Why is it fair for a landowner, and I'm asking you, to sign up and receive up to $18,000 a year for each 60-story structure when his neighbor doesn't want it, or the neighbor has issues with all of it takes to go across maybe their land to get to the turbine for whatever reason, or to build it? There is a problem about leasements, which would be this company coming to those who are not putting a turbine on their farm, but are asked to be paid a leasement to allow for the use of their land to cross to get to a turbine. So even though we'll never have one on our land, we may be asked for the neighbor on the hill for it to cross Bay Circle. And
Do you know if that's something that the companies can require you to accept?
they push it, but at this moment, there are, in Clay County, I believe it is, they have sent, and parts of Madison County, that leasement issue has caused the, it's not Liberty there, but whoever's trying to build turbines there, to leave. The leasement issue of the acreages and farms affected around a turbine is huge. And that's just something that I can't answer that question exactly, but there's a lot of pressure.
I'm confused, Bertram. Do you mean like a leased easement?
It is a coined phrase, yes. It's a coined phrase by Janice Swanson. She writes for Farm Progress, and this article was in the Des Moines Register.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Yes. So, again, as they were pressuring my sister and brother-in-law, do you have children? Don't you want a legacy for your children? You signed this lease for 20 years, you get $18,000 per. They were saying, no, we came here to find out what's going on. But this was their thrust. So I'm asking you, as a agency, to move quickly to get the information that you need, to make sure that all landowners and trusts and property managers are getting this information, that they understand the height of these turbines. I felt badly for an elderly man who was having trouble finding his farm on this old blue map. And I'm thinking to myself, does he understand what this really is? But yet, he's one of the ones counted on to be a signer for a turbine. I think the whole public should know in Muscatine County what this proposal is going to be. And I'm asking you to look very carefully at the ordinances that are in place. My understanding that in 2016, West Liberty was looking at a couple of smaller turbines to help augment their electric costs. And then there were no things in progress. So this is all very good. I'm trying to read through it and I digest it, but this was written then when turbines were 275 feet high. The setbacks are basically 1,000 feet from structures or homes.
2 times
barns.
the total height of the system.
Or 2 times the total height. And in Iowa, we are actually one of the smallest setbacks of many states. But we ask you to expose this, explain this, allow for perhaps public forums, to allow for petitions. Franklin County, the Franklin County Board of Supervisors enacted recently a 1-year moratorium on the approval of building permits and construction of wind energy conversion system to update zoning requirements applying to such projects. That would be smart. And I'm asking you to take into consideration the way you have things regulated, what a company like this would, with changes in their product. The megawatts at 6 soon are going to be going to 10 megawatts or more. So we need to look ahead and think about everybody in this county, not just the ones that they conveniently mailed to. In our family situation, my brother Stephen Salmick got 2 letters. Renetta, who owns more land now, did not get any. I did not get one. And Steve's son, my nephew, owns a lot of that, since my dad died, owns a lot of our farm now, did not get a letter. And on the old map, it shows the Danner property to the north of us, and next to him, the Harney farm. Mr. Harney passed, and it's bought by Danner. So that's how bad and then on 22 down on the corner at Johnson County line, which is prime topography for a wind farm. I know for a fact that a farm sold there at auction in that corner within the last year. So, again, all the people need to know what this is about. A letter from you. I don't know how you operate. This is my first in-town meeting or supervisor meeting, but I really feel strongly that this needs to be taken one step at a time through you. Are there any questions or things that you didn't
I think,
catch?
and step in if I misspeak, I think there's a process, even if this company goes out and signs contracts to potentially build these things, that still have to get approved by our county engineer, our zoning department, and, you know, to make sure that it even goes on to the next step regardless if they were signed contracts out there. And it's possible when this was written in 2016, I mean, that was written with the understanding of 300, or roughly 300-foot windmills, and now they're 600, so it's possible that we may have to look into the consideration or not considering going to these larger ones. I'm still learning a lot on this and the process, but that's the information I have.
Yeah, I would say that this particular developer, I think, has been highly unusual, I would say. We have had utility scale interests come to Muscatine County. Typically, they reach out to our planning and zoning, and that's the first step where they start to understand the requirements. And the 2016 one, I was on the board in 2016, and that was the city of West Liberty was working with a solar or a wind developer out of Nebraska, I believe they were, and they had done these smaller scale wind units, and they were looking to augment. So at that time, we kind of proactively, we did not have any zoning ordinances, and we did begin the process, just like we have done recently with solar. So because we've had interest with solar farms in the county as well, and there's a lot of issues around all of these. So, you know, I really appreciate all the information and research you put together is very good. And I don't know where this one goes. Kurt had made me aware. I was unaware that this was, I don't know, Eric, did they even reach out to us about?
Yeah, I'll speak to a couple of things.
Well, we got a letter last week, didn't we have it in our packet last week? And it's been pretty fast tracked through because I received my letter. The Friday, well, yeah, you didn't get one, so the Saturday before this meeting, so they are
Yeah.
moving pretty quickly.
So, to start off, this is fortunately, this is pretty typical of the way the green energy projects, start putting feelers out in counties. We typically don't receive as a county, any formal application, really any, formal inquiries until they've really tried to get a sense of potential landowner interest, potential leasing interest. This is something we've learned over the last 10 years as these things, they feel out areas. Their investors are looking at all different options all the time. Everything that's been stated, I believe to be correct. This company did come to my office a couple months ago, not unlike several others over the last 10 years. Hey, we're looking at potential wind or solar. We don't even know yet if it's gonna be, this company does work in both. They weren't able or not willing to give me an idea of the actual area in the county. They weren't sure yet. They were given the ordinance at the time. I made them aware. I cannot tell you how much they've looked into it or if they even care at that point, because it's often the more difficult part is determining landowner interest, and if they don't have landowner interest, they don't care what our regulations are. Once they deem the area having enough potential interest that they can go to their investors and say it looks like it might work, then they can fairly quickly look at the requirements on our ordinance and determine whether they're too onerous, too expensive, that type of thing. But it is also correct, when we adopted our original commercial wind energy conversion system ordinance, it was based on the technology and size typical at that time, 350 foot towers. And I learned the same thing when I stopped up at the meeting. I was not emailed directly about this public input meeting. was the same two gals that had came to my office a couple months prior. Nancy forwarded it to me when the board was notified of it, and so I was able to top in and learn that these things have grown significantly. I think the 600-foot height is probably potentially the tip of an upright blade at the 12 o'clock position. What was relayed to me is that at the actual turbine height would be like 450, so it may be in that 600 to 650, which if it stopped in that position, that is the height of the tower, over 600 feet. And that's how we would look at it and apply our separation distances. But this is a very typical way that these companies often begin their process, is reaching out to potential landowner. I can tell you they've not solicited any landowner or parcel data information from us. I saw the same map, noticed some outdated things. It was a little vague with road markings on it as well. It was kind of hard to get your bearings on the potential study area. But they did not request, and I assume that's just, they determined how much investment they wanted to make in getting the word out and to what they deem as an acceptable number of people to gauge landowner interest. But we certainly can do that at any time if they give us the limits of their boundary. With our GIS, we can give them much more up-to-date owner information, but they didn't request that they somehow determine the contacts on their own. And it looked like it was several years old. But again, as she spoke, these processes often take a number of years and are often we find out later in the process. I think there's anything else. That's kind of the way, been our experience.
Yeah, they work at it backwards to how one might really think, but it's really not in their regard. They look at the amount of acres that they can possibly have access to, and then they look at what their business is in regard to what they can utilize in either wind or solar, and calculate that relatively quickly, I'm sure, on if that's a profitable operation for them or not. And if it is, maybe they'll move forward. If it's not, they'll just move on. That sounds like that's the consensus.
And the one point I wanted to mention, if a company was to actually make application to the county for a special use permit, which is the process they would have to go through for wind or solar projects, we would then determine, based on their map of where their structures would be, who has to be notified by our public notice laws. They would we would require the specific locations of any of their apparatuses, and we would make sure that using more up-to-date parcel information. But again, it's kind of late in the process, and it would be only at that public hearing that maybe neighbors would find out about the potential size of these things. This one was a little more vague, but we're learning that's kind of typical.
Okay. Yes.
May I make a couple of comments, please?
Step to the podium, state your name and address, please.
I'm Rhonda's husband. I'm Dane Meredith. We live on Bay Circle in Nichols.
Okay.
And I want to clarify a couple of things. Indeed, the 200 mile an hour is the wind tip speed if the turbine is operating at full capacity. So obviously the blade, as it's at the hub, it's not going 200 miles an hour. But the blade, which is why birds are so likely, particularly large birds, to be into the field of the wind turbine. We live on a 2-acre property, and as I told Rhonda yesterday, we were walking around, I said, you realize that the circumference area of the blade that scribes in the sky is more than twice our acreage. It's 4.5 acres in the sky spinning. Up the top of it 600 feet. It's simply enormous. Now, from a business standpoint, it makes sense for the wind turbine companies. Bigger, taller is better. You generate more energy. You're out of barriers, so that the wind is more constant and available to the turbine. It's also easier for the wind turbine company to generate more. It takes as much effort to go to a landowner and convince him
we'd like to lease your land for a wind turbine. It takes as much effort to do that for a 2.5 megawatt wind turbine as it does for a 6 megawatt wind turbine. So there are good business reasons for this. And I would end with, we didn't even discuss the potential, because I really don't know, the noise factor. It's the whooshing, the swishing, because it's an amplitude modulation of the air as the wind turbine goes through. The wind turbine companies have made advances over the last 15 years. It's a mature technology now. They do put, the responsible ones put insulation in their nacelle. That's where the generator is located. So the noise, the electrical noise, is dampened from what it was probably 15 years ago. But you can't dampen the noise of the air moving. And I would end with an anecdotal story of my own. I grew up in Michigan, about 20 miles north of Detroit, when Detroit was somewhat of a thriving city in those days. And big buildings, 60 stories tall. And they were on the horizon. They didn't move. They didn't move. And you know, as we lived there, it became part of our landscape. In 1957, I was a 7-year-old boy, and my dad said, let's go see the Mackinac Bridge. It was newly constructed to connect the Upper Peninsula with the Lower Peninsula. We stopped for an ice cream cone in a little town called Sheboygan, Michigan. And I looked and said, Dad, there's the bridge, it's right there. He said, no, we're only about, another 15 miles to go. And it was just simply enormous.
It's the same height.
Then we got there, and it was even more enormous. It was only 550 feet tall. Still is 550 feet tall. Point being that something that tall can be seen, the tip of it can be seen on level land 30 miles away. That's basically, if you live in Muscatine County and you don't have trees in your line of sight, whatever, you're gonna see them. Will you hear them? Probably not, unless you live where we live. It dawned on me as you were talking about distracted driving. You think there might be a few drivers distracted by that wind turbine spinning in the sky out in the country? I know it won't help drivers focus on the road. I was glued to the road looking at that huge Mackinac Bridge, which was 100 feet shorter. So right now, there's a huge pot of money available with the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm not here to discuss politics. I favor development of energy sources, clean energy sources. We're gonna run out of fossil fuels and nothing else. Forgetting the CO2 factor, we're not gonna have future generations fossil fuels available. But there are other technologies that are poised to come on stream that would render wind turbines obsolete. Geothermal is probably where we're going. People talk about nuclear fusion, maybe 50 years, but geothermal is going to be available within the next 10 years. The company, Ever, located in Calgary, Alberta, has several projects underway in Germany right now, since the Germans shot themselves in the foot with their Russian connections and their lack of energy. Basically, they're using existing techniques from the oil industry to put radiators, if you will, 3 to 4 kilometers underground and tap into the hot earth. The energy is not intermittent. It's available 24 hours a day, and it can drive industry and personal and residential use. Perhaps the one technology, and it's being developed right now at MIT, a guy named Paul Waskoff, using something called a gyrotron, which was developed in Russia, that vaporizes through granite, and it's their intention to make holes 12 kilometers, 20 kilometers, 12 miles deep. And that's down in very, very hot rock in the mantle, so you get superheated steam. The beauty of that is, if it works, the Russians tried to dig a hole that deep. It took 20 years and they had to abandon it with conventional techniques. If that works, it's their intention to go to sites like the big coal-fired plant here on the Mississippi, here in Muscatine, which we all know is gonna be abandoned at some point in the future.
I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, sir. I'm 15 minutes late for an appointment. I've got to run.
No problem.
Thank you for coming in.
You bet. Conceivably, they could drill and tap into the energy there, generate steam to drive the existing turbines at that plant, where the infrastructure is already there to consume it, with no footprint in the countryside, no wind towers. We won't even know it's happening. And the same with other geothermal techniques. The world is increasingly hungry. The war in the Ukraine has deprived the world of about 11% of the grain calories available to the world. Here we are in Iowa. This is some of God's best farm country. And why we want to abandon part of it to build wind turbines that are likely to be abandoned in 15 years doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But it does from a business standpoint, because the companies, particularly the solar and the wind turbine people, they are mature technologies. And there's a huge pot of money available to tap into right now. The government has subsidized this, and there's a rush to access it. The tax credit is available at an undiluted tax credit, a 100% tax credit, until the end of 2024. So you're gonna have these companies going around the country trying to get leases established so they can, under the guise of public service, their business. And there's a lot of money available to drive this. Money is driving this project, the 6 megawatt concept, more than climate change. And I appreciate your time in listening to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Okay. Do I have anyone else from the public that would wish to speak at this time on any issue? Seeing no one come forward, it is 10:44, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.